to Volpe Memorial Library at Wakefield Memorial High School. I'd like to thank you all for being here today. Say hello to the Freemans, and thank you for being here. Nan's sister, Liz, right here, I'm sorry. Faculty, students, my name is Dennis O'Leary. I'm the assistant principal of Wakefield Memorial High School, and on behalf of Ron Straminski, the principal, I would like to welcome you here for the rededication of this bust of Nan Freeman. When asked to give opening remarks, I thought of what I could say about someone who grew up in my generation. I was also the class of '71 at another high school, and thought I had to go back into my mind of what the time of that era was, and it was time of turmoil and almost avoidance, staying away from other people's problems, and Nan didn't do that. In looking at the display that was prominently displayed outside and reading about her life, she took action. She wasn't part of the problem. Nan was part of the solution. And in trying to sum up what her life was about, I had to think of to go back to a post that I read a long time ago, and it's prominently displayed in a few offices in this building, and that is, as we go through life, we will not be remembered by the type of car we drove or the clothes we wore or the house we lived in, but we will be remembered for our service to others. That's the paraphrase. And that is why we're all here today, to remember Nan Freeman and to celebrate her life and to rededicate her bust here. So I welcome you all today to Volpe Library. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. I want to add my welcome to everybody. It's nice to see some faces from the past, and especially grateful to have the Freeman family with us today. Today we honor the 25th anniversary of the death of a remarkable young woman. Nan Freeman was a graduate of Wakefield High School in the class of 1971. Not only was she a tremendous student, an outstanding student, but she was a champion of the underprivileged, even when she was in school, as well as the victims of social injustice everywhere. And sadly, her death in 1972 was a result of her efforts on behalf of one such group, the migrant farm workers. Upon reflection of those of us, those few, I guess, who are still around that remember Nan, she remains one of the truly outstanding scholars that we recall ever graduating from Wakefield High School. In fact, her family has kept some of her writing, which when you have a chance you might want to take a look at down front here. And I was brought up short the other day when I was looking at the display, when it was out in the display case, and saw my written comments on one of her papers. And I thought, wow. I also saw the date, and I thought, was it that many years ago? And where have all the years gone? I thought how wonderful, for a moment I thought how wonderful it would be if all of our students could be like Nan. And then I thought, no, maybe not. Maybe not really, because while each of our students is special, some stand out. Nan stood out. Not only was she a superior student, as has been mentioned, but she was one who formed her values and then acted on them. Indeed, she stood out. She was also a very humble young lady. I recall one time when she had taken the AFL-CIO scholarship test, which was a statewide competition, with just at that time one first-place winner across the state. And several months later, she waited after class one day until everyone else had left. She kind of sidled up to me and she said, "Remember that test I took?" I said, "Yes, I remember." She said, "Well, I think I won it." And sure enough, she produced a letter confirming that indeed she was the state winner. That was Nan. She did stand out, and in so many ways. When Diane Lind and I, a couple of months ago, thought maybe this would be an appropriate time to have kind of a rededication of the bust that you see here, and just a rededication of the life of Nan Freeman. We thought perhaps it would be an appropriate idea to have students participate in an essay contest that focused on how an individual could indeed make a difference when it comes to social injustice. And that was the theme of the essay. We had a great many entries, and you're going to be privileged, I think, to hear the winning three this afternoon, and these three winners will be receiving a special prize a little bit later on, later in this program. So it's my pleasure at this time to introduce one of, these are not in any particular order for the moment, one of the three winning essays, which will be delivered by Craig Wetmore, president of the junior class. Craig?
This year marks the 25th anniversary of the death of Nan Freeman. Nan Freeman was an individual who knew what she stood for and went after her dreams. Her devotion to help others was a true indication of her unselfish character. Nan Freeman became aware of the problems of migrant farm workers while attending New College in Florida as a freshman in 1972. She joined a picket line at a local sugar mill. Nan was killed that morning in a tragic accident involving an out-of-control truck. She became a martyr for Cesar Chavez's United Farm Workers. Nan was always a happy person, earning the nickname Morning Glory from her friends. She achieved happiness by helping others. Nan Freeman was fighting social injustice when she died. She gave her life for the benefit of others. In America, there are many ways in which one individual person can try to change the problems of social injustice. The individual is the most vital part of the equation. However, one individual combined with many others is much more successful. The most important parts of changing social injustice are having a dream and a following. The individual is the leader. There are many actions one can take in a leadership position. Gathering together and motivating a group of people with a similar goal is the first step. Once a unified whole is formed, one can do anything. Rallies can be held, protests can be made, boycotts organized, petitions can be presented, and marches can be carried out. Martin Luther King is one man who made a difference in the life of every African American living in the United States today. The increasingly successful civil rights movement of blacks was due in part to King's actions. His efforts to corral his fellow peoples culminated in various successful marches, which were instrumental in pushing much-needed civil rights legislation through the federal government. His famous I Have a Dream speech is a perfect example of how one can deal with the social problems in our country. He took a stand and fought for it. An individual can also promote one's cause through education. Horace Mann, a pioneer in the field of education, once stated, "Education is the great equalizer of the conditions of man." This is a true statement. With the absence of education enters the presence of ignorance, one of the main reasons for social injustice in America today. Nan was not forgotten by her peers. She was a motivated individual who wished for the world to be an improved place. Nan died carrying out her beliefs. Cesar Chavez, leader of the migrant farm workers movement, said of Nan Freeman, "On Tuesday, January 25, 1972, Nan gave her life for farm workers. She had joined with farm workers in their struggle against Talisman Sugar Company in Belgrade, Florida. Nan was hit by a truck on the picket line and fatally injured. She was 18 years old when she died. To some, she is a young girl who lost her life in a tragic accident. To us, she is a sister who picketed with farm workers in the middle of the night because of her love for justice. She is a young woman who fulfilled the commandments by loving her neighbor even to the point of sacrificing her own life. To us, Nan Freeman is Kadosha, a holy person, to be honored and remembered for as long as farm workers struggle for justice. Nan Freeman should not be remembered only for her death, but also for her life. January 25, 1972 was the day in which her ambitions were shattered by a tragic accident. It was not the only day in which she gave for the benefit of others. Her entire life was dedicated to giving. This is for what she should be remembered.
For the last several years, this lovely, smiling face has beamed down on us in the library from her perch over there on top of a bookcase. And for many people, she was a stranger. People just didn't know who Nan Freeman was. I knew Nan a long, long time ago, even longer ago than when she was in high school, when she was in junior high school. And I can remember Nan taking part in a Christmas program that Ray Cipolla and I wrote a long time ago called The Bird's Christmas Carol. And she played the part of a lovely, delicate little girl who was not destined to live very long. The irony of that always gets to me. So it seemed as though everybody should know who Nan Freeman is, who Nan Freeman was. And so with the help of wonderful people like Rena Hannaford, our librarian, who is hosting us this afternoon, and Dennis O'Leary, who found a person who could take care of our wants and needs very easily, we now have a plaque in nice big letters so that everyone knows that this represents Nan Cindy Freeman, who called herself Morning Glory. What a lovely name. 1953 to 1972, Wakefield High School class of 1971, a human rights activist and a beautiful, beautiful spirit. So now, Miss Elizabeth Eckborg, Barbie to me, is going to say a few words, and then after Barbie finishes, anyone else who would like to add some remembrances, we would like to have you do that.
Thank you. And before I start, I do want to welcome a couple of people here that haven't been mentioned in the opening remarks. And Ingrid Seaman, and she's the organizer for the United Farm Workers in the Boston area. And also Sister Tess Brown, who's been very active in the movement. And we warmly welcome you, as we do her best friend, Diane Doria. For some of you, my remembrances will be a little bit repetitious. There was a wonderful memorial service held at Boston College on March 23rd. And it was a beautiful day of dedication, of recommitment for the United Farm Workers' struggle, for the memory of Nan and her many contributions. And it was a celebration of hope and of recommitment. And so some of my remarks, some of my remembrances of Nan, what I shared that day. And let me begin by saying it is good to be here 25 years later, remembering Nan and remembering her passion for justice, and it is healing to honor her memory. It is good to remember how one person can make a difference. As Nan Freeman Senior High School English teacher, I remember a wordsmith, a creative writer, a scholar, a soulful and compassionate spirit, a humanist, a humorist, and a young woman committed to family, school, and life. I'm remembering also about the yearbook and how it opens with her pen name, Morning Glory, and ends with her desire to be a social worker. It's hard to capture the spirit of Nan because it was so very special. Nan, besides all the attributes that you know about, that she was second in her class, that she was a merit scholar, that she was a gifted writer and poet and friend, Nan was fun. And she had a sparkle to her and a charisma to her. And she was a teenager through and through. And as Liz reminded me, she had that teenage angst that was so endearing. And her humor was priceless. I remember the day that Nan turned a poem into me, and there was a flower at the bottom of it. And it was then that she told me that her pen name or her nickname was Morning Glory. And I sighed then, and I remember thinking how perfect and fitting, for Nan had, like that flower, deep roots and incredible beauty to share with us, and she did. And I remember going to my department chairperson the year that I had her and saying, and this was just after a few weeks in English class, saying, this young person is so gifted. Her writing just sort of flowed. It just, and she could just take a simple phrase and turn it into a brilliant image and do it in such a humble way. In many ways, Nan was a private person. She had a rich imagination and a depth that far exceeded her years. She was direct, as I said, and witty and often outspoken. And she did have that passion for justice. And And reading over some of the writings that she did for Mr. Blanchard and on some of the social justice issues, she wrote back then, in these were dated in the 1970s, about the plight of the American Indian, about the treatment of blacks, about the migrant farm workers. And one that really made me smile deep inside was a long paper, and Nan could do long papers, and well-researched, I might say, was on environmental issues. I mean, Nan was visionary. To read that paper in the context of what's going on today, she was so far ahead of her time. So she did write eloquently and persuasively about the plight of the marginalized in our society. Nan made the connections between word and deed, as we know, between right and wrong. She made those connections between feeding our souls and empowering ourselves to do the hard work of justice-making in the world. Today, we gather together to look back at the gift of Nan's life and the proud legacy of those courageous souls who have inspired us to look forward to a better world. Nan would want us to carry on, to renew our commitment to the United Farm Workers struggle, which right now is very active with the strawberries and the mistreatment of workers. And I know Ingrid has left some information here for us to read. She would want us to carry on our commitment to stand in solidarity against the injustices in the world. And I thought it was just so fitting that we would consider her a human rights activist because she had such a vision. It carried itself into so many areas of life and the injustices. Although Nan was only with us for a short time, her life was filled with successes. Success may be defined a number of different ways. In my opinion, the definition which most defines Nan's life was written by Ralph Waldo Emerson, success, and I quote, "To laugh often and much, to win the respect of intelligent people and affection of children, to earn the appreciation of honest critics and endure the betrayal of false friends, to appreciate beauty, to find the best in others, to leave the world a bit better, whether by a healthy child, a garden patch, or a redeemed social condition. To know even one life has breathed easier because you have lived. This is to have succeeded." Nan's contributions and the light and the love that she shared with us will always be honored and remembered. Thank you.
Good to see you, Selma. My first year teaching, and right in the front row sat a most beautiful child, dressed in a pink dress, the first day of school, smarting, and a big smile here on the side with a barrette. And she did everything she was asked to do, and yet she had time to giggle. And she did have a most infectious giggle. I still remember that day. And 18 years old, where are you? And 25 years later, she's remembered. Age has nothing to do with what we give. We can give it at 1, we can give it at 20. Some of us, hopefully, by the time it's time for us to go. She was a very, very special human being, a very, very special child that I remember. I followed her successes, and I was just, her death just really left quite a void in my life. I remember the picnics in the backyard, and there she would be making sure that I would be comfortable, because I was the teacher. And that's all. Just a beautiful, beautiful soul, and what a wonderful memory today to have with her. Oh, I'm always one of those ohs. She fell under the right tree. Selma, and you working away to provide for a family. The first check that came in for the Lorette from you. Therefore, her giving nature, her spirit of looking for the underdog and being there,
came from, the roots. It doesn't come from the air, like always.
Good afternoon. My name is Terry Holmes, and I'm the school superintendent. I'm certainly pleased to welcome you here today and to join in this celebration of the life of Nan Freeman. I regret, after hearing what I've already heard, certainly listening to Mary and to Diana and others talk about Nan Freeman, that I never had the opportunity to know her. I've known people like Nan Freeman who had the courage to step out of the mainstream and stand for something. Remember clearly, something that's always meant quite a bit to me. I choose a profession that sometimes I have to step out of the mainstream and do some things that are not always popular. It is important to stand for something, because if you don't stand for something, you often will fall for anyone. Think about that, especially you young people, as you think about what you will do with your life. Will you stand for something? Will you stand enough to stand up in front of that tank in Tiananmen Square? You remember that picture on television. Will you have the courage to stand up for what you think is right? Will you take a placard on the main square in downtown Wakefield and stand for something? I hope, as we all face the challenges of our life, that we will find something to stand for, something that we believe enough in that we might even give our life for. And if we do, then, as Mary said so eloquently, we will live forever in the minds of people around us. So thank you for allowing me a couple of moments of your time today, and thank you for the life of Nan Freeman. Thank you.
This essay is entitled The Brave Members of Society. One person can fight social injustice simply by expressing their views and opinions and taking a stand. The brave members of society who take the initiative to speak out against injustice can change America and beyond. Some inspired leaders and civil rights advocates of the past are Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Mohandas Gandhi, Susan B. Anthony, and Nelson Mandela. The influence of these courageous people still lives today in the hearts of their followers. Mohandas Gandhi fought for justice in South Africa and in India. In 1907, this Indian lawyer began a long campaign of passive resistance when a bill was passed to restrict the immigration of Indians to South Africa. Passive resistance was the use of non-violent acts to protest. Then in 1919, Gandhi was outraged at acts passed in India which allowed the government to imprison agitators without a trial. Also, judges could try cases without juries. These injustices caused Gandhi and other Indians to protest by fasting and stopping work throughout India. Gandhi also used the boycott in a non-cooperation movement. Gandhi showed courage and perseverance in his efforts. He was arrested more than 3 times but never yielded to the injustice which he fought against. Susan B. Anthony combated social injustice in her pursuit of women's suffrage. She led women in the 19th century to secure an amendment to the Constitution which guaranteed women the right to vote. Anthony faced great opposition, yet she never sacrificed her beliefs. The amendment, the 19th, was achieved in 1920, 14 years after her death. However, this just shows how the ideas of Anthony lived on after her death as a result of her lifelong writings, lectures, and organizations. Many Americans proudly call the 19th Amendment the Susan B. Anthony Amendment. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a peaceful, intelligent man, led thousands of blacks to fight injustice and segregation of blacks and whites during the 1960s. He encouraged nonviolent methods of protest, such as sit-ins at whites-only lunch counters and ride-ins on segregated buses. King spoke at a peaceful march on Washington, stating, "I have a dream." His dream was not much, only that his children be judged on the content of their character rather than the color of their skin. He pronounced his hope that one day this nation will rise and live out the true meaning of its creed, that all men are created equal. His powerful speeches on eliminating racial inequality through brotherhood, freedom, and justice prompted desegregation, black suffrage, and reduced discrimination. As a result of his efforts in leading a boycott of buses, the Supreme Court outlawed segregation in public transportation. King truly was a hero, for threats were made against his life, his house was bombed, but he never gave up his struggle for social justice and equality. Nelson Mandela was a strong leader who worked for the equality of blacks. And apartheid, or racial separation, in South Africa lasted for years when the white minority government was in power. Then, in 1989, F.W. de Klerk became prime minister and disengaged apartheid, which pleased the blacks who lived in South Africa. Also, he freed a black nationalist leader, Nelson Mandela. Mandela had been in prison for over 20 years under the former government. In 1994, Mandela became prime minister of South Africa. He went through much of his life in suffering because of his firm belief in equality and social justice. One does not have to change the world to make a difference. The bold woman who pickets against unjust censorship laws, the young girl who petitions against the new dress code, the strikers who will not tolerate the dangerous working conditions, and the senior citizen who takes a stand against the new imposing taxes at the town meeting all make a difference. They protest. They fight for rights. They demand justice. One such person fought and protested, upholding her goals for justice and her support for the United Farm Workers Association. She held true to her convictions throughout her life, similar to a Mohandas Gandhi, a Susan B. Anthony, a Martin Luther King Jr., or Nelson Mandela. Others will follow her lead and emulate a Nan Freeman.
So far, the essays have been wonderful, and I think this was a wonderful way to honor Nan. As a graduate of '64 and having had Mr. Blanchard, I was always very grateful that I had him before Nan had him and didn't have to follow her act. I think it would have been quite difficult. When Mrs. Hannaford asked me to help with the display, it was kind of interesting to go through a lot of the things that we had collected in the house and try to decide what to put together that was Nan. Because for most of the time I knew Nan, she was the little girl in the high chair eating watermelon and berries, helping us try to raise money so that we could adopt a husky puppy, which she does refer to in a story she wrote in, I think it was a third grade essay that I put over there. That I found of hers. In fifth grade, she wrote a poem about America that I thought was kind of lovely and I put onto the display board. For some of you who don't know the significance of the brown hat was her protest hat. And if she was mad about something, she'd put it on and let you know. And you kind of hope that you could figure out why and kind of stay clear for a while anyhow. Because although she was most of the time very happy, she did care passionately about different things. Something I just read recently, or I had read it a long time ago, but I had forgotten, was when she met a Native American woman that I guess visited our temple. Is that where it was? Yeah. And 'cause I don't remember that. I was probably away at college or somewhere. And she was just really upset because it's like, what do I say to this person? I can't possibly say anything correct. But of course she usually did. On the display board, I also put telegrams that we had received from Mrs. Martin Luther King and Cesar Chavez and Ted Kennedy at the time. I'd kind of forgotten about that until I went and put the things together. On there, I did put a few things that I had kind of tried to remember who she was, because we were talking, she was a real person. She was a teenager. She fell in love and liked falling in love and try to think of interesting things that are common to do, like just say hi to everybody who walked by. She liked chocolate. In her diary that she wrote when she was on her trip to Europe with Clark University, quite a lot of entries were what she had to eat that day and where she found the chocolate. The one thing I forgot was her collection of toilet paper from all around Europe. Now, do we have that? And that I didn't notice when I was going through the closets. And she also liked watching Bullwinkle every week. The last thing that we had done together, I think, or one of the last things that I remember was going to a Janis Joplin concert together at Harvard, and it was one of Janis's last concerts. Yeah, she was in the math club, she was in the drama club, so she did a lot of other things besides her higher level esoteric writings. And there's a lot of things that I could say about Nan, but a lot of them have been already said. One of the things I did put on the board was, although there's a collection of buttons from the farm worker history, and actually when she was working with the sugar workers in Florida, the union was actually quite new. There are a few buttons on there that are that I had collected because they weren't actually officially United Farm Workers at the time. At the time when she died, I remember being very cold days picketing for lettuce outside an A&P in Philadelphia. And from the time she died, we've done things with Gallo wine, lettuce boycott, grape boycotts, and now the strawberry workers. So I thought that, and when I'm out there, I do consider that she's there. And when Ingrid and I go to the march in Watsonville next week, I did have something to do during the blizzard yesterday, but I took an old shirt from 1987 that when I went out to Delano for the 25th anniversary of the Union, and I added to it from Massachusetts, not only to Delano, but to Watsonville, and on the back, she will be going with us. I have Nan's name, Caesar Al-Shankar, the head of the AFT, the American Federation of Teachers, of which I belong to, and also a thing for the strawberry workers. So she will be coming with us to California.
My essay is titled Remembering a True Believer. Nan Freeman, a Wakefield native, gave her life fighting for the rights of farm workers in Florida. 25 years later, her friends and colleagues are honoring her memory. When she died, Nan was just a few months older than I am now. But listening to my teachers talk about Nan in school, I realized that she had a much clearer picture of her purpose in life than I have now. It is obvious that she cared greatly for the fair treatment of other human beings. She was unselfish and definitely had a great impact on the lives of those she touched. I believe the people are put on this earth with a purpose. Though many do not ever truly understand what theirs is, the few that do seem to force us to look inside of ourselves and re-examine our roles in society. Nan was chosen to fight against social injustice in America, as were many others before her. Some of these pioneers of humanity seek to be put into the positions they play, and some are thrust into them overnight. Nevertheless, these chosen people can change history and improve the lives of the countless others by simply taking action in a cause they believe in. Mahatma Gandhi incorporated all of the above statements when he said, "Each of us must be the change we want to see in the world." Social injustice has always been a part of our society. Before the Civil War, Harriet Tubman tried to use her Underground Railroad to free black slaves in the South. She went down in history as one of the most important female historical figures. Harriet Tubman chose her role and was prepared to suffer the consequences that it entailed. During the 60s, Martin Luther King Jr. led the civil rights movement and inspired a generation of people to fight for the rights they were entitled to. He was unique in his strategies of peaceful protest and was remembered for his inspiring and emotional speeches. These two well-known historical figures chose the roles they played in society, and their efforts are still applauded today. An appropriate quote by an unknown author that pertains to these two symbols of changes: "When the lights are out all around you, you may be the one to turn on the lights." AIDS, the plague of this century, has cast many unsuspecting people into the spotlight. Ryan White, a teenage boy fighting the disease, became a ray of hope for other children like him who were also suffering. He shed light on the discrimination many people with AIDS face in the communities they live and really put the disease on the front page. People began to become better educated on the subject as a result of his efforts. He helped other children with AIDS by making them realize that they were not alone and that their lives were just as important as any other person's. Recently, the death of Jonathan Larson, who wrote the Tony Award-winning musical Rent, again brought the reality of AIDS closer to home. In Rent, Larson outlines the lives of 5 young adults who are struggling living with AIDS in New York in the 90s. It deals with such subjects as homosexuality, drugs, and hopelessness. This is a story of Larson's own reality. Sadly, he unexpectedly died on the day Rent was to open to the public. His passion for living and music lives on in Rent. The back cover of the soundtrack states, "Listen to his music, reach out to your community, and celebrate all the love in your life. No day but today." Another unknown author wrote, "Many people go from one thing to another searching for happiness, but with each new venture they find themselves more confused and less happy until they discover that what they are searching for is inside themselves, and what will make them happy is searching for their real selves and sharing their real selves with the ones that they love." Nan Freeman found her real self, and she spread her love for justice to everyone she met. She made the ultimate sacrifice for her love, and that is why we're honoring her memory today.
When Miss Lind, Diane, and I started to put the essay part of this program together, we thought we got to find some money stashed away somewhere to make it a little bit more attractive to the students who are going to write these essays, so there'd be a prize or two at the end of the line. And while we struggled with that, I think it was the very next day, I had a call from our next speaker who said, "We want to fund the prizes." So would you especially welcome Diane Doria, who represents the Wakefield Junior Women's Club, who will make the presentations. Diane? Diane's a graduate of Wakefield High School as well.
Well, I have to say that it's with a tremendous amount of pride that I return, and to represent both the Women's Club and as one of Nan's probably best friends. I can fill in the years in between. Nan and I grew up together. She was 2 years behind me in school. And the other night I was looking through my yearbook, and I see these very shy pictures of Nan as she's standing with the math club. She can just about see her hair, and she's smiling, but she's looking very quiet and very shy. And I was sitting back there listening to all of the wonderful things that have been said and looking at her nephews, who have unfortunately never known their aunt in person, but I think are probably getting a pretty good picture of who she was. And I looked around here in the library, and I thought, began to remember meeting her in the library in the morning before we went to class in what was the old high school way back when. I'm proud to say I'm a '69 grad of Wakefield High. I was also Mr. Blanchard's student. He'll always be Mr. Blanchard. I can't make myself call him Dan, no matter what I do. Miss Eckborg was starting her first year. She was a study hall teacher of mine. And when the high school was in the center of town, it was, I think, a wonderful place to be. And I wondered when it moved here if it was going to continue to be a wonderful place to be. And I realized as I walked through the halls coming to the library, which I must confess I had a hard time finding, I looked around and I thought Nan would love this school. She would love it here. First of all, she would love the library because of the access you have to all of the important writings of people and generations. I'm under the impression that this is supposed to be the place that the Volpe papers will hopefully find their way to stay. And again, Nan would have been thrilled because she was really excited about the world around her. as I walked through the halls and I heard what was going on in the music department, again, she would have been thrilled. For those of you who don't know, she was a Beatle fanatic. She was my dearest friend, and I still hate the Beatles. Excuse me. As for her mom and dad, I have many, many wonderful, fond memories of my parents interacting with them. We lived side by side. We grew up together. Nan was fun. She was funny. She knew how to listen, and she knew how to talk very well. She knew when you sort of needed a boost and when you needed to be left alone. What I remember about Nan was that we were just sort of always together, going to the temple, to different programs. I think I spent more time in the temple than I did in my own church as a child growing up, with all sorts of activities. And we shared many things, and so it is a tremendous pleasure to be able to be here this afternoon. For the women in the women's club, when I presented this to them, we wanted to draw the attention of the community to the young people who have written these essays, and to the young people who wrote, who, quotes, didn't win, and to say on behalf of the community that we are thrilled to hear and to think that you took the time and the extra effort to write, to express yourselves, to gather your thoughts and put them in a way that can be expressed through the written word. And we will be inviting you to join us at one of our meetings, probably in May, to read your essays and to meet the people behind these. Okay, so it's my pleasure, without any more words, to present the prizes. First prize to Kylie McRae. Yeah, stay here. Second prize to Erica Storola. And third prize to Craig Wetmore. And I think a tremendous round of applause is due for the kids, but I also think we need to add and invite Miss Lynn and Mr. Blanchard to join us up here for that round of applause for the hard work they put in. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Diane, for the very nice words and for being here, doing what you've done. Would anyone else from the Freeman family like to say a few words at this time? Selma? Your husband's pointing at you, so I guess that means you're it.
Well, I'm totally happy to find a place for my child, and all of the efforts here and all of the things that Nan represented. This was her home, this was her life, and Mrs. Diopoulos was the beginning teacher that she always admired, and Diane and all of these people kind of came together, and it was beautiful. And these young people should be commended for all of their efforts. And I hope that their life will be a challenge somewhere beyond the high school, into college, into a life of their own. So I want to thank everybody for this wonderful presentation and for taking care of my daughter forever. Thank you.
Like to add a few things to lighten up this memorial. One of the things that Liz mentioned about this protest hat, this was come on many times for various reasons. It could be something in the news. It could have been something on the radio. It could be something that the Beatles did wrong, or most anything. And you didn't talk to Nan until the hat came off. She wore it in the house, and that was her way of doing penance or something. I don't know what. I have a little presentation to give these young people. I have a little story that I wrote years ago about Nan, and I have one for each of you. But a couple of things that I enjoy reading myself all the time. And this is one of her scribblings. She did a lot of scribbling, never got into print, but we used to find it around the house. Speaking of school, one time, one of her papers come back. I think it was a math exam or something like that, and she wrote on the corner of it, "I am sick." And I don't know who the teacher was, but he wrote back, "A+, I don't know what mark I would have given to you if you were well." And he wrote this on her paper and handed it back. A lot of her papers, somehow, I don't know, I can't prove this, but I think they were circulated around the house because she never got them back for months. I don't know if the teachers were playing around with them or what, but this is one of her scribblings, which I really enjoy, and it's called Happy Things. And I guess these are boys' names. Frank's and Richie's and Ira's and Brad's and Mike's. Blowing bubbles. Grilled cheese subs. Finding a mountain and meeting sunset at the top. Listening to records in the dark with someone you love. Talking or playing with a little kid. Reading one of your favorite little kids' books. Being in love. Sharing a dream, a thought, or a smile. Making someone else happy. Melting into a sea of joy and oneness at a concert. Becoming a color. Becoming part of a poster. Getting a letter from a friend. Dumping all your letters all over yourself. Looking at the world through a kaleidoscope. Seeing other people happy. Sitting on a common and throwing a party for anyone who walks by. Standing on a street corner and saying, "Excuse me," to everyone who walks by. Sitting on a cloud, hot fudge sundae. And this is one of the things. And then there was one poem, I don't know whether somebody saw it or not, but she writes little scribbles here. But war, oh, war is raw, spelled backwards. It hurts. Before the open mirror, deed is still deed, and Eve is still Eve. But here's one that goes on to the English part of it that she wrote, and it's about a seed. A seed buried its head in the dirt, keeping its green thoughts tightly wrapped in its brown shell, protected from the bitter wind of hatred and the coldness of winter, hidden from the inquiring eye of a passing earthworm or two. Then the sun spied the little seed and smiled down on it. It sent the warm rains of compassion to wash away its shyness and fright. At last the seed broke free from its coarse brown bonds. An adventurous idea nosed its way to the surface and bared itself to the world around. With the encouragement of the sun, new thoughts, dreams, and desires came tumbling out. At last the little shoot stood bravely up all by itself. Its taut young body swayed to the melody of the wind. The birds sang, and Mother Nature herself adorned the shoot with garlands of spring jewelry. The sun greened radiantly above, and peace and happiness frolicked above. Another someone had found himself, another someone had learned how to live. And a signed Morning Glory. I'd like to give you these.
I just have a PS, like Mrs. Diopoulos is like, oh yeah. One of the things that I was thinking as even when we talked about having a memorial, that Nan would probably be very mortified that we were even here and doing this. She would be saying, like, I didn't really do anything. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time or whatever. But what I think she would want all of you to do is to decide on which social cause you are interested in. There are so many to choose from, and I don't think she would care which one, but that when you left here, you would say, gee, I'm going to do a little bit more for my cause, whether it's just keeping a flyer or mentioning it. If you're standing in line at the supermarket, you might say, you know, there are pesticides on these grapes. Or doing something, you know, maybe writing a letter or doing something. And it doesn't really matter what, whether it's going over to my brother's table and serving a meal, but to do something. And I think that's what I would like all of you to, just before you leave, mentally write down in your mind what you are going to do and to act on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you, everybody. I should mention in closing that Nelson and Selma Freeman are now living in Florida, and I'm sorry, and I was going to say I hoped you appreciated the special weather tribute we had for you as you came up. Before you all leave, I hope that you'll mingle with members of the family and make note of the various items on display, and please there's a full tank of coffee and there's cake. Please help yourself, and thanks once again for coming.